Live from SABC studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to this Thursday edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko, and on the show tonight,
journalists asked me over the weekend whether I was ever terrified or scared. I said no, I wasn't. And it was largely due to the fact that I have really good protectors, and I thank them.
A fearless President Ramaphosa hits back at his critics as Parliament concludes the debate of his State of the Nation address. Our panel for this evening weighs in on some of the things that the President said. An academic reflects on the legal implications of the declaration of two states of disaster, one on electricity and another as a response to widespread floods. We also pay tribute to a forgotten hero, Black consciousness stalwart Peter Jones, the last man to see Steve Biko alive. All that coming up in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts right now. President Cyril Ramaphosa has defended his decision to appoint an electricity minister, together with that of declaring a state of disaster. Ramaphosa was replying to the debate on his State of the Nation address.
Load shedding and energy problems once again under the spotlight. This as the president moves to reassure the nation of the government's plans to resolve the ongoing electricity crisis this year.
We do not need another plan. We need to accelerate the implementation of the plan that we have already put to the nation in July last year. We have already taken a number of important steps to reduce the severity and frequency of load shedding. The measures which the Minister of Finance will announce in a week's time in his budget will boost the rollout of rooftop solar by business and households.
The president has also poured cold water over concerns about the imminent appointment of a minister responsible for electricity.
Some have suggested that the appointment of the minister will cause confusion and fragmentation, and that it might also result in turf wars amongst the ministers who deal with energy and ESCOM. That is not the case.
He's also dismissed criticism over the declaration of a state of national disaster, which the DA has threatened to challenge in court.
We will ensure that environmental protections and technical standards are maintained and that procurement is undertaken, yes, with transparency and proper oversight. We will use the state of disaster to rid of unnecessary bureaucratic obstacles that stand in the way of urgently bringing new generation capacity onto the grid.
He's also confirmed for the first time publicly that his deputy in government, David Mabuza, will soon leave office.
Deputy President David Mabuza has indicated his wish to step down from his position. This is a request I've informed him I'm considering and attending to.
Ramaphosa also thanked his security detail, saying he was unfazed by last week's disruptions.
A journalist asked me over the weekend whether I was ever terrified or scared. I said no, I wasn't. And it was largely due to the fact that I have really good protectors, and I thank them.
Ramaphosa has used his reply to call on lawmakers to find common solutions for the country's common problems. His appeal to them not to throw stones, nor portray the country as being in chaos. Ramaphosa says his presidency over the past 5 years was hit by the global COVID-19 pandemic and was emerging from the era of state capture. Ulelani Philip, SABC News, Parliament.
To discuss the president's reply, I'm joined by Professor Beki Mngomezulu from the Nelson Mandela University's Center for the Advancement of Non-Racialism and Democracy. Dr. Kuhle Zwagala is a political party brand analyst based at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. Good evening to both of you, and thank you so much for your time.
Good evening to you, Voyo, and the viewers, and good evening to my colleague.
Okay, it looks like we have lost Dr. Kuhle Zwagala. We're going to try and re-establish that line. Prof, do you think the president convinced whoever may have been skeptical of his decision to declare a state of disaster to deal with the electricity crisis?
No, thank you very much for the question, Buyo. Maybe before I answer a question, let me just pass our condolences to PC Jones, the last person to see Steve Biko alive. Coincidentally, our center has been working closely with the Azapo, and today we're to send a letter of condolence to the family and also to Azapo. No, thank you very much. So basically, the president came to this State of the Nation address well prepared in terms of answering questions that were asked or that were posed by the parliamentarians. One thing that I noticed when he started off, he indicated that he listened with a keen interest as parliamentarians were raising issues of concern, and also the concerns that have been raised by some of us, including this issue of appointing the Minister of Electricity. So I would say to that extent, the president did well by acknowledging what each of the members of parliament were saying, the likes of Malema, the likes of Buthelezi, the likes of Mkolego Hlengwa, and a couple others, and was able to pinpoint the key issues that they placed on the table. And of course, another one whom I didn't hear of was Floyd Shibambo, because the way Shibambo address this particular SONA was totally different from the manner in which he has done before. He started off by providing solutions, which is what the president has always been asking for, that politicians must refrain from basically dismissing almost everything that government is doing, but they must consider what has worked. In cases where they have solutions, they must put those on the table. So I think to that extent, the president has tried. And then, of course, as we continue to discuss, we'll go to the crux of the matter and then see if the substance of his response, in fact, responded to the issues that were raised from the ground.
From where you sit, Dr. Zwagala, did the president silence his critics? Okay, we're still to be having problems still with that line. So back to you, Prof. Let's talk then about, let's start perhaps by talking about electricity. The president says that the minister of finance will give details when he delivers his budget speech about things that measures that the government is going to take, measures government is going to take, including, of course, rooftop solar that are going to be installed in homes. But isn't that perhaps something he perhaps should have done right now, so that by the time we get to the budget speech, the finance minister will talk rands and cents? Do you think, you don't think that he may have missed an opportunity?
Thank you very much, Voyo. No, I lost you temporarily because of the connection. It keeps causing some problems. Yes, absolutely. The president had all the time to take the nation into his confidence, not just parliamentarians, but the nation into his confidence, so to indicate that he has thought about the issues. Immediately after his presentation, there were a lot of concerns raised. I'm one of those, in fact, who raised some of those concerns. The DA is saying that it is going to take the president or parliament to court for declaring the state of disaster. I hold a different view, at least on that one. My view is that the state of disaster is in fact long overdue. It has been delayed because this electricity crisis is affecting all of us, which is why my colleague has just disappeared now. I also had some glitches earlier. So it is a serious concern. But on the issue of the Minister of Electricity, I've said it before, I'm saying it now, I'll say it tomorrow, that it was unnecessary. We don't need a Minister of Electricity. The President, when he tabled his SONA, indicated that we have enough engineers in the country, we have enough people to implement whatever strategies that are in place. So the question is, what is this minister going to do? If Pravin Gordhan is there as the Minister of State Enterprises, Gwede Mantashe is there as the Minister of Energy, why do you then need a Minister of Electricity? So there are a number of questions in that regard.
And I guess Gwede Mantashe didn't make the president's life any easier by saying, this guy, whoever is going to come and occupy that position will simply be a project manager.
In a way, Gwede Mantashe was right. He was being sarcastic, but in a way he was right. In fact, the president does not have the kinds of powers that most people think he has. The power resides elsewhere. You would have seen that on the 21st of November, when the president felt that the heat was too much and he wanted to resign, it is the likes of Gwede Mantashe who said, we are not going anywhere. And they protected him with everything they have to make sure that he continues in this position. As to why they did that, only them can answer that question. So when Gwede Mantashe says that the yet to be appointed Minister of Electricity will just be someone out there, not necessarily a minister in the full sense of the word, and he may be right, because you may find that he's there in person or she is there in person because you don't know whether it will be a male or a female, or maybe it will be me or it will be you, or we don't know. But the reality of the matter is the person to be appointed will not have as much power as we think that person will have, as long as the likes of Gwede Mantashe are there, and in fact someone who is occupying the portfolio of being the Minister of Energy, which is exactly the reason why I think we don't need that minister at all. Not to say that there is money that is going to be wasted. I was saying, for example, that if you take a quarter of that money that we are going to give to that minister, and then you appoint someone to get all the facts as to why we are unable to get rid of this load shedding, you will be better off. You will get the facts, you get the report, you get the recommendations, you already have implementers, if the president is right in saying that there are people with the requisite skills to do that.
Dr. Zwagala, from where you sit, that was a question I was asking before we lost you again for the second time. Did the president silence his critics today?
Yeah, good evening, Will. Good evening to viewers. Yes, I think the president's response was characterized by clarity. Clarity on the work that government has done, but similarly, the president does not shy away from conceding to where the government has erred, right? So I think it provided a bit of clarity. But he was most emphatic on how he finds, he was scathing on how useless the opposition parties are. For instance, the SONA response then turned into a political contestation terrain. So for me, I picked up that he sort of redefined what the purpose of SONA is, and in his own words says, let's spend the chance of confronting current challenges and renewing the government's promise, the constitutional promise to the public. So I think he was very scathing, and he provided a bit more clarity, more than he did in the initial SONA speech.
But I mean, one thing we should all give the president and the members of his executive, though, it is that they do concede. They concede a lot. But the problem is usually what they then do or don't do after conceding. I mean, earlier today, I was listening to the minister in the presidency talking about crime, conceding that, the government is losing the war on crime. So they are good at that. But what people have pointed out, over the period in the past 5 years is that the problem is the follow-up, what they then do after conceding.
Yeah, true. I think if you want anything to do as a South African, we must hold the government, accountable. So I think the governing party has gotten to a stage that they've become what Minister Brain Zamanda called enemies of their own success. Right? There is unsaying that. Let's be honest, Bukuya, the current government was working for the people. It was working for its people up until to a certain stage, right? The so-called 9 wasted years. Particular decisions were made in December 2007, and today still we're still bearing the consequence of those decisions. So they do not have any option but to concede, to say, we're the government, we've tried this and we're failing here. But you must look at the president's posture. He really emits a spirit of collaboration, a spirit of willingness, of co-creation of the solutions of the country's problems. That is saying that we alone as the government cannot do this by ourselves. For me, the reason I say there was a response characterized by clarity, that he emits a sense of optimism. As I said again, does not shy away from referring to the state capture, right, which was based on the previous regime. He does not shy away from the aiding economy that they inherited. Yes, he was the deputy president. So I think if you can get a government to be that honest, but I suppose the flip side of the coin is that we have a very weak position in South African politics. So should we be forced into a coalition arrangement come 2024, I think we will have seen a small pilot of how massive these coalition governments are. So for me, I'm worried about the weak opposition. And to your point, I think the government is putting out a call to say, let's collaborate, let's co-create solutions to common problems.
But I hold a different view, though, Dr. Zwakala, because I feel if the government has what it takes, to deal with the challenges that this nation faces, let's just go ahead and do what needs to be done. They don't need the cooperation of opposition parties. I mean, opposition parties, by their very nature, tend to play, opposition politics. They try to explore the weaknesses of the incumbent. So if the government knows and is able to do what needs to be done, that's what they should be doing, and not worry about whoever criticizes them, because their work will speak for itself.
Given the political opposition parties must play their role. They must expose the governing party's weaknesses, right? So I live in Cape Town specifically, where a different organization rules, right? I can tell you this for free, in line, very consistent with what the president alluded to earlier on. He said local government inefficiencies, they affect all political parties. The disparities between the different sections of the Western Cape are very concerning. So, again, I want to be very emphatic on this. It's very important for the public to hold the governing party accountable. But it's equally very important for us to look at the chaos that these coalition municipalities are doing in Nelson Mandela, in Tshwane, Johannesburg, you name them, right? So, for me, what's more concerning about government inefficiencies is weaker opposition parties.
Okay.
Had we had a stronger opposition parties, I'm telling you, the governing party would have pulled up their socks quite a long time ago.
Okay. Let's take a listen to what the president had to say about the issue of unemployment.
Employment stimulus has created work and livelihoods opportunities for 1 million people to date, most of whom are young people. We have implemented far-reaching economic reforms to restore confidence in our economy, and that is why investors are looking at our country with great interest and many of them investing. We've opened the way for private investment in electricity generation for the first time and released spectrum to harness the potential of the digital era. For a province like the Northern Cape to have attracted 100 billion rand in investment in just a matter of 3 years must mean that something is cooking and happening. We have successfully mobilized new investments in factories, production lines, call centers, and the Western Cape is teeming with a lot of call centers that are being set up here. Farms and mines are being invested in across the country. These have created jobs and opportunities, including for small business. Special economic zones in Gauteng have been set up because international companies have seen that we really mean business.
Prof, we mean business. We're not doing badly. We're doing well, actually.
You know what, Vuyo? Factually, the president may be correct. But then contextually, I don't think so. Because if he's talking about countries that are investing in the, businesses that are investing in the country, including those who are already in the country are continuing with further investment, the question is, would we be where we are or would it be better had we addressed the issue of electricity? Because the reality of the matter is, if we have 5 investors, chances are there are 15, 20 other potential investors who are playing the wait-and-see game. Until we sort out the electricity crisis, they will be waiting on the side, waiting for us to sort out the electricity crisis. Because it makes no sense, no business sense, to open a business knowing that for 4-6 hours a day, you will not be making any profit. Then, of course, you have to look elsewhere and then look at other opportunities. So the president is right in saying that there is the political will to do the right thing. But then, of course, coming back to the question, to the point we made earlier on, that saying something is one thing, doing it is something else.
In fact,
and this is a disease that is not only affecting South Africa, but it's affecting the continent. The president is going to Addis Ababa. They will be coming up with very good policies. But come implementation, as one of the MPs was saying in Parliament yesterday.
In fact, a ratings agency, Fitch, today was raising the very issues that you are raising, Prof. Interestingly, Dr. Zwagala, in a statement released yesterday, the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry, SACI, said business confidence, the business confidence index fell to 112.9 in January from 117.3 in December. That's 4.4 index points.
Yeah, I hold a very different view on this confidence matrix. Highly subjective, highly contextual, right? So, for instance, I generally do not agree with this index matrix as I've said. The United States of America could be facing a similar challenge, economic challenge, but you would never hear of a low business confidence or investment confidence. So I must just happen and honestly, those are very subjective and very perceptual, in my view.
Now, one of the things the president was criticized for last week was, those reports that David Mabuza, the deputy president, had indicated that he wanted to step down. The president today, Prof, saying, yes, indeed, he has indicated that he wants to step down. And he says, to quote him from that insert we played earlier, it's a request that I'm considering and attending to.
Only in South Africa can these things happen. You know, the reality of the matter is you have the president of the country being citizen number one, and then the deputy president of the country citizen number two. Ordinarily, if the deputy president is resigning, the first person to know will be the president. And as soon as the president is aware of that resignation, then he will inform the nation. It doesn't happen that the deputy president goes to a funeral and then he announces it at that funeral that, by the way, you are the people who sent me to parliament, and I'm now telling you that I've notified the president of my resignation. It doesn't happen that way. So basically, there have been delays, and part of the reason is that we are expecting the president to do a cabinet reshuffling. But we don't wait for that in a position like this one of a deputy president, because truth be told, the deputy president is still in place, but he's only physically there. Mentally, he's no longer there because he has tendered his resignation. So why do you keep him for much longer when, in fact, he has indicated that he wants to exit the stage, as it were, and then we have an opportunity to do that quicker than delaying it. So that part I don't understand. Maybe the president, when he does the cabinet reshuffle, eventually he will explain himself on that one.
Dr. Zwagala, is there something to be said about the president's handling of the resignation of the deputy president, as well, of course, as the delays in announcing a cabinet reshuffle?
Very presidential from the president. A very smooth transition. You'll recall that some claim that President Ramaphosa owes his presidency to Deputy President DD. Right? You recall what it transpired in Nazareth when DD swayed the conference, the ANC conference, towards the CR17 slate. So for me, I think it's very presidential. It's very a smooth transition. He would not want to ill-treat a person that essentially delivered him to presidency. And a very befitting send-off of the deputy president.
Okay. Let me thank both of you, Dr. Kuhle Zwagala and Professor Begum Gomezulu. Thank you so much for your time and insights this evening. After the break, the government's declaration of two disasters at the same time, the implications for all of us, and what it all says about our fragility as a nation. Reflecting on the COVID-19 pandemic experience, one academic wrote, "It is worrisome that with a shared declaration of a national state of disaster under the Disaster Management Act, the National Coronavirus Command Council mysteriously emerged as a super commanding body that governs the affairs of a liberal constitutional state with unprecedented concentration of powers, devoid of transparent legal mechanisms that could sanitize its existence and powers," close quotes. Paul Modau, a PhD candidate and researcher at Wits University School of Law, joins me on the line to reflect on the legal implications of the declaration of two states of disaster, one on electricity and another as a response to widespread floods. Paul, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. Do we have something to be concerned about? Should we be worried about the declaration of the states of disasters now, given the COVID-19 experience you spoke about in that quote I just read?
All right. Thank you so much, Vuyo, for inviting me to participate in the show, and good evening also to the viewers. My answer to the question is, given the intense background which we had or experienced with the COVID-19 pandemic, it is my thoroughly considered view that the implications which we might have in the current two state of disasters, one based on electricity crisis and the other on the floods, I think they are on separate and distinct planes as opposed to the COVID-19 pandemic. Mind you, the COVID-19 pandemic was an international or global crisis which affected each and every facet of life in all areas. However, in this instance, the state of disaster based on electricity, it is human-caused occurrence. instead of being a natural disaster as opposed to COVID-19. And the other one, which is based on floods, I believe it is a kind of a hybrid between the two. So right now, the main thing which we could look at is which forms of directives the Minister of Cooperative Governance will issue, because I believe that during the COVID-19, the directives were meant to ensure that people or citizens are able to comply with physical distancing, isolation measures, hygienic practices, and quarantine. Whereas in this context, you find that the issue, it relates to electricity. Does it directly affect people? Do they actually need to also play their role? Yes, people are affected by the electricity crisis. However, I believe that more action is required on the part of the government to ensure that the rollout of generators, solar panels, and uninterrupted power supply, it is actually implemented on the part of the government than on the people themselves.
And isn't that where the difference is? Because, I mean, the criticism that was mostly leveled at the government had to do with how people's freedoms were curtailed. It also had to do with how law enforcement agencies at times behaved, harassing people, beating them up for not complying, and so on. Whereas with these disasters, it's about, as the president was saying also in Parliament today, creating the kind of environment that will make it easy for things to happen pretty quickly. So, and that's where really the difference is, which would then, to someone like me, would suggest that perhaps we shouldn't have much to worry about on that score. Of course, I'm not talking about monies and abuse, and all of that, but to the extent that people's freedoms won't necessarily, or conceivably, they won't be tampered with, there won't be the violence meted out to people the way we saw in places like Alexandra, we shouldn't be really worried. Am I correct?
I think you are partially correct. So I did try to provide a background that with the COVID-19, it was more of trying to control and manage the spread of the virus in order to minimize infections and death. But in this context, it deals with electricity and floods, meaning it wouldn't be necessary to provide or give directives that curtails people's movement. I don't think there is any need to issue such kind of a directive. What they need to do as a government is to ensure that there is a maintenance of energy provision in order to ensure that people actually enjoy their right to use electricity. In the current juncture, you find a situation where even the president, I saw from his SONA presentation and debate, where he's intending to even appoint a minister of electricity who will be dedicated to ensure that he or she addresses the electricity crisis. To myself, I believe that it's something which is far-fetched. I just believe that electricity would still have been resolved if there was a better maintenance of ESCOM facilities. Right now, we see that in the Department of Presidency, we have got the Ministry of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities. We've got the Ministry of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, and now we're adding the Ministry of Electricity. I just believe that it is a form of a confused government, which is pretentiously acting as if they're actually resolving crises by duplicating roles among ministers. And ESCOM, which is actually failing to fulfill its objectives. It is a public entity which is responsible for energy. And the line which is there is a need to draw the line as to where ExCom is actually accountable to in terms of ministerial positions. Is it the Minister of Public Enterprise or the Minister of Energy? So it is my thoroughly considered view that currently in South Africa, there is a highest form of bad governance, which indulges in a form of misdirected kind of leadership.
Okay. Paul Modao, let's leave it there for this evening. Thank you very much for your time. He is a PhD candidate and researcher at Wits University's School of Law. After the break, Professor Seth Cooper pays tribute to a forgotten struggle hero, Black consciousness stalwart Peter Jones, the last man to see Steve Biko alive. Black consciousness leader and Steve Biko contemporary Peter Cyril Jones has died. The struggle veteran died yesterday at his Pringle Bay home in the Western Cape after suffering a stroke. He was 72. Jones was the last person to see Steve Biko alive. The pair were arrested at a roadblock near Grahamstown in 1977. Biko later died in prison. Well, joining me in studio to pay tribute to his comrade is another stalwart and Black consciousness adherent, Professor Seth Cooper. Good evening, Prof. Thanks very much for your time.
Good evening.
What went through your mind when you heard the news?
Well, I just said to myself, oh no. I know that he was ill for a while. He battled ill health for about 4 years. And Peter was a fighter. His strength kept him going. And very clearly, the good care that his wife Ingrid provided him and that his daughters and others provided him kept him going. And when this happened, I thought this is the end of an era where last year Kenny Tlaku Rachidi died, and now Peter Jones. These were people who stood the test of time, even when others around them faltered. Biko was murdered. They emerged stronger. They emerged with the will to fight for what all of us believed in. And Peter was a charming person, very firm, very clear, very personable, quick to laugh, just like his mentor.
In fact, you just reminded me of, I remember the first and last time I actually met him. It was in Cape Town. We did an interview, which was as a tribute to Steve Biko. I couldn't find the interview, and he was. I was just. He's that kind of a person who draws you in. Very simple, down to earth, not intimidating, and you can't even. You can't even. I didn't experience any sort of anger. He was just this person you wanted to sit with and spend the whole day and maybe weeks with, because he was just able to draw you in. And I was a stranger. He was meeting me for the very first time, but was prepared, willing to just open up.
No, he was. I met him for the first time in January 40 years ago. In his little four-roomed house in Makassar, Somerset West, where he was banned and house arrested. And immediately I met him, the same feelings. And we got on like a house on fire. We knew what buttons not to press because he had a certain tone which you knew if you went beyond that, that was it. He would call you out or exclaim. And I think his charm managed to woo lots of people. The tributes pouring into his house to those close to him, on the different groups that many of us are part of, just show the sheer love, the sheer admiration that hundreds of people, I'm not lying now, hundreds of people from across the political spectrum have felt, because a part of their history was reflected on the 18th of August 1977, when Steve and he were arrested at that roadblock, clearly set up to detain them on that ill-fated visit to Cape Town.
Well, to talk about knowing which buttons to press, because you knew the kind of response. They would elicit. Dr. Ramaphosa was talking earlier, to our colleagues about Peter Jones and anger. We can play that clip.
Was to help organize larger than life, handsome, gorgeous, always very generous. And you could never see Peter angry. He always had a smile. And when things were hectic, he would be calm. And so that's the Peter we got to know.
Peter the Charmer.
Yes, he was. Very clearly he was. Well, I dare say that ilk of young people who, in their late teens and early 20s, decided that banning of the liberation organizations after Sharpeville was not going to quell us, that we would do something about it. And hence you have the advent of black consciousness. Hence you have so many who were conscientized during that period, proliferating across different political organizations, playing roles in this country and abroad. I dare say some of them have probably lapsed. I won't mention names, but the current president, was the chair or involved in the Black People's Convention. There wasn't a black political organization that replaced the ANC and PAC. And in forming the BPC, we knew, well, so-and-so was Mpama or so-and-so was Nindi. And our view was this and this brought you together to form this clenched fist, which is the symbol from that time to now. All of us use it. And all of us believe in it, but all of us don't express it in the same way.
Well, he wasn't only, an activist. He actually, from what, again, Dr. Ramaphosa was saying earlier, he actually brought skills that made the movement at the time, and I'm using this in the broader sense, not the movement, that he brought, which strengthened the ability, of the activists at the time, in terms of making sure that people were organized, they were thorough. Take a listen to how Dr. Ramaphosa puts it.
His main role was to help organize our growing financial affairs, which all of us were just activists who knew nothing about bookkeeping. So he came to establish order in that direction.
And I think it underscores, a point that you can be active all you want. You could be committed all you want, but you also need to be organized.
Yes, and look, he completed his BCompt degree. He didn't quite continue and finish his chartered accountancy qualification, but he was taken in as an associate by Mustaq Bray. And Mustaq Bray and Associates provided accounting and auditing services for many organizations throughout the country. And Peter played that kind of role. But he also was passionate about development, particularly rural development. He, Monelo Bongo, Pandalani Nefolovodwe, Kenny Rachidi were involved in a major project from the Eastern Cape right through to the KwaZulu-Natal border, training people in skills on farming, agriculture, and so on. And there's how to do it, if you like, that they produced, which is still a primer for restoring land to the landless or to the original owners of the land, and how they can cultivate it effectively, particularly at this time when our poverty rates, when our hunger is stark and upon us.
On days like these, we always ask that question: how do we pay tribute to people like Peter Jones? How best do we do it, especially given our current challenges?
I think by retaining a positive outlook, by keeping that smile, keeping that principled approach to changing things, being the best you can be in whatever you do, not doing it with any mediocre half measures, because our people deserve the best. They don't deserve half measures. And it's up to us and those who remember Peter Jones, who remember Biko, who remember the other pantheon of leaders who brought us here, to give off their best so that our people can benefit from a quest for excellence.
Professor Scopa, thanks very much for your time.
My pleasure.
And that brings us to the end of tonight's show. Thank you for watching. Do join us again tomorrow evening, same time. Have a good night.